The winding road up Devil's Ridge hadn't seen many travelers in decades. Trees pressed in on both sides, gnarled branches clawing at the pale morning mist. The asphalt was cracked, worn away in parts, overtaken by creeping moss and the stubborn roots of pine and dogwood. Elijah Ward kept his hands tight on the steering wheel of his rusted pickup, eyes scanning ahead as the fog thickened. He was 38, a journalist for Mountain Mirror, the kind of publication most folks only picked up for obituaries and local gossip. But Elijah had a reputation for digging up more than bake sale dates. He had written about moonshiner bunkers in abandoned mines, old Civil War letters found stuffed in attic rafters, and once a snake-handling church with ties to a string of disappearances. But this one wasn't just folklore. It began with a letter. It had arrived 2 weeks ago, handwritten in precise cursive, the paper yellowed and brittle at the edges. Dear Mr. Ward, you don't know me, but I've followed your work. If you're looking for something real, truly real, come to Devil's Ridge. Find the old Harmon Church. It was abandoned in 1971 after what they claimed was a fire. That was a lie. If you want to know what happened, come before October ends. J.C. Elijah had read the letter 5 times before folding it into his coat pocket. He'd never heard of a Harmon church, but he'd heard the name Devil's Ridge whispered by older Appalachians, always with a kind of superstitious weight, as if just saying it out loud might bring something down from the trees. Now he was here, mid-October, the air sharp and smelling faintly of rot and pine sap. The GPS had cut out miles ago, but he had a topo map, and according to it, the road should dead end near an old cemetery. Sure enough, the truck shuddered to a stop near rusted gates half swallowed by brush. A hand-painted wooden sign swung crookedly on its hinges, Harmon Ridge Baptist Church, Est 1898. The church sat deeper in the woods, barely visible through the branches, more a shadow than a structure. Elijah grabbed his camera and voice recorder, slinging his leather satchel over one shoulder. The morning mist curled around his legs as he stepped over a collapsed section of the gate and began the short hike up the path. The closer he got, the stranger it felt. The birds had stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place. The church was a skeleton of itself, roof partially collapsed, the once white clapboard siding now gray and peeling. Ivy had climbed up and over the steeple, its tip leaning precariously like it might fall at any moment. The windows were long gone, empty sockets staring outward. Elijah pushed open the front door. It groaned, hinges rusted stiff. The interior was dim, beams of dusty light falling through the holes in the roof. Pews were overturned or broken, hymnals rotting in piles. On the altar, a tarnished brass cross lay on its side, and next to it, a charred wooden box half covered in soot. He approached slowly, every footstep echoing louder than it should have. The box had once been locked, but the latch was broken. Inside were several cassette tapes, each labeled with a date, October 3rd, 1971, October 10th, 1971, October 17th, and finally, October 24th, the last Sunday before the church was burned. He pulled out the recorder from his satchel, checked the batteries, and inserted the tape marked October 3rd. The tape clicked, whirred, and then crackled. Then a voice began to speak. Not a preacher's voice, a child's. We gather again in the dark where the Lord won't hear us. Elijah froze. The voice was high-pitched, raspy, and strangely calm. Pastor Harmon says the fire will come if we sing it right. Mama says to keep my mouth shut, but I know the words now. I heard them in the walls last night. The recording ended abruptly with a loud thump. Elijah stared at the recorder. What kind of church lets children speak like that into a sermon tape? Outside, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind him. He turned. Through one of the shattered windows, he thought he saw movement. A figure? No, just the trees swaying. He collected the rest of the tapes in the box and backed out of the church, eyes scanning the tree line. The woods felt thicker now. The path he'd taken in seemed narrower. He walked back to the truck without incident, but when he reached the cemetery again, something stopped him. All the gravestones, dozens of them, had the same date of death, October 24th, 1971, and every one of them bore the surname Harmon. Elijah knelt in front of one of the stones, brushing away the moss with shaking fingers. Margaret Harmon, age 11, died October 24th, 1971. The next stone, Reverend Elijah Harmon, age 47, Then another, Luther Harmon, 9, Ruth Harmon, 13, Tobias Harmon, 6. A whole family. No, several families. A congregation? He stood, heart pounding, and glanced toward the tree line. The wind had picked up again, hissing through the dry leaves. It sounded too much like whispering. Back inside the truck, he slammed the door shut and locked it out of instinct. The old engine groaned, then caught. He turned the heater on full blast and stared at the cassettes in the passenger seat. Why would a child be recording something like that? Why were there so many Harmons buried in the same place, all dead on the same day? That night, back in his rented cabin, 20 miles down the mountain, Elijah poured bourbon into a chipped mug and set up his old cassette deck beside his laptop. He decided to digitize the tapes one by one, starting with the next in order. October 10th. He hit play. At first, static, then muffled voices. A woman sobbing softly in the background. Then the same child's voice again, this time more urgent. They made us walk around the altar last night, 7 times, like in the stories. Pastor says if we walk right, we open the way for the real choir. Not the one in heaven, the one beneath. The sobbing grew louder. Another voice broke in, deeper, male, trembling. You said this would keep them away, Pastor. You said they would take only one. Then came the sound of footsteps, rapid, someone running. Then a scream, then silence. Elijah sat frozen, the bourbon forgotten in his hand. He felt like the air had left the room. He copied the audio to his laptop, labeling it with a question. Cult? Possession? Before he could hit play on the next tape, a knock echoed from the cabin door. His eyes snapped toward it. 3 slow knocks, then silence. He hadn't told anyone he was staying here. There were no neighbors within miles. He crept to the door and looked through the peephole. No one. Another knock. This time, from the back door. Heart pounding, he grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside through the front, circling around the side of the cabin. Nothing, just trees, wind, and dark, until he looked down. There, in the dirt, were small barefoot prints, dozens of them, child-sized. He backed into the cabin, bolted both doors, and shut off all the lights. He didn't sleep. By morning, the prints were gone. The third tape, October 17, was even worse. It opened with singing. Children's voices off-key, chanting some kind of hymn Elijah didn't recognize. The lyrics were muddled, but certain phrases came through. The mouth opens wide beneath the roots. Sing loud, and the eye will not blink. Do not stop, or it'll choose you next. Then the pastor's voice, booming, unhinged. The fire is the offering. Let the veil burn. Let the children speak. Another voice, breathless. She's floating. Oh, God, she's floating. Then the sound of something wet, slithering. Flesh against wood, screaming. More than one person. Then a sound Elijah would remember the rest of his life. A high-pitched giggle, like a child's laughter, echoing over a roar of fire. He stopped the tape. He was sweating, trembling. He called a friend, Tessa Marins, an archivist at the regional library who sometimes fed him Old Town records. When he asked about Harmon Church, she was silent for a long moment. Then, "You're not up there, are you?" "I found tapes, a lot of them." "Get out. Eli, I mean it. That church was condemned twice, once in 1964, then again after the fire. But the weird part, there are no records of the fire department ever responding. No police reports. It's like the place just stopped existing. And you're not the first to go looking." He sat down. "What happened to the others?" "Some never came back. One guy, Rick Travers, came down out of the ridge barefoot, covered in ash, speaking in tongues. He hanged himself 2 weeks later." Elijah pressed his palms to his eyes. "What if this is real?" he whispered. "What if there's something not human in those woods?" Tessa didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was quiet. "Then I'd stop listening, and I'd burn those tapes?" Elijah didn't sleep the next night either. He couldn't. Even with the lights on, every shadow in the cabin felt wrong. The trees outside loomed larger than they had the day before, like they'd crept an inch closer while he wasn't looking. The wind didn't rustle anymore. It whispered in a cadence that felt like breathing. Despite everything, he couldn't stop himself. He played the fourth tape. October 21st. It began differently. Not with a voice. Not with static. With singing. But this time, it was clear, harmonious. A choir of children's voices, soft and precise, chanting in perfect unison. Bless the altar, blood and bone. Praise the choir carved from stone. Let the eye beneath the hill drink its fill, drink its fill. Then the pastor's voice, low and breathless, more like a prayer than a sermon. They've come closer. I see them now when I close my eyes. They're not devils. They're old. Older than the dirt. The mountain belongs to them. It always has. The sound shifted. Someone dragging something across wooden floors. Children weeping in the background. Footsteps, barefoot, many of them, moving in a slow, steady rhythm. Then, a voice Elijah hadn't heard before. A woman, young, shaking. I don't want to be here anymore. They made Ruth walk the altar circle. She didn't come back right. She just smiles, even when she bleeds. A pause. Then, they said we chose this, that the ancestors promised our blood when the iron came, that the choir would sing again when the Harmon line ends. Elijah paused the tape, his hands clammy. The Harmon line. Was this all tied to that family? Was the pastor's madness generational? Or worse, was it true? Was something being kept in those hills, fed piece by piece over decades? He checked his phone. No signal. He stared at the recorder. The final tape sat alone on the table. October 24th. The date all the gravestones shared. The day it ended. But he wasn't ready. Not yet. He stepped outside into the cold dusk air. The trees were silent now. No birds, no wind, and just a thick stillness that pressed against his ears. As he looked out at the woods, he saw something move between the trunks. Small? Pale? A child? He called out, "Hello?" But his voice died in the air. The shape turned and vanished into the shadows. Elijah's flashlight clicked on, its beam cutting into the underbrush. He followed the path behind the cabin, heart pounding. 50 feet in, he found it. A clearing he hadn't seen before, though he'd walked this trail several times. At its center, stones. Dozens of them, arranged in a perfect circle. And at the very center, something else. A door. Wooden, half-rotted, sunk into the ground. A trapdoor. It looked hand-carved, sealed with thick iron nails. Symbols were etched into the frame, crude, angular things that hurt his head to look at. He reached out and touched the wood. It was warm. Suddenly, singing from beneath, faint but growing louder. Children's voices, that same hymn. He stumbled back, tripped over a root, and hit the ground hard. The singing stopped. Something knocked. From underneath the door, once, twice, then a third time. The door shuddered. Elijah scrambled to his feet and ran. He didn't stop until he slammed the cabin door behind him and shoved a chair beneath the knob. He was shaking, covered in dirt and leaves, mouth dry as dust. He didn't remember falling asleep, but when he woke, it was morning. And the final tape was playing. He hadn't touched it. He hadn't pressed play. But there it was, October 24th. No static, just silence. Then breathing. Then the pastor's voice. They've taken the last of us. Ruth walks with them now. Her eyes are black as pitch. She sang the hymn, and they opened the door. The choir is awake. They don't need us anymore. The blood has been paid. The bones buried deep. Let this be a record. Let no one come looking. Let them sleep. The tape clicked off. Elijah sat in stunned silence. Then he heard it. Outside. Children's voices. Singing. He rose slowly, his legs unsteady, and crept toward the window. Pulling back the curtain, he half expected to see nothing. Just the trees, still and unmoving. But the clearing in front of the cabin wasn't empty. They were there. Children. Dozens of them. Dressed in old-fashioned clothes, barefoot, standing in a perfect circle. Their faces were turned toward the sky, mouths open in eerie harmony as they sang the same hymn from the tape. Their skin was pale, eyes hollow, too still to be alive, yet too solid to be ghosts. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Their voices rose in pitch, vibrating the glass in the window pane. And then, in perfect unison, they stopped. Every child turned their head toward the cabin, toward him. His breath caught in his throat. They didn't blink, didn't flinch, just stared. And then, one by one, they began walking. Not toward the cabin, but around it. A slow, circular procession, bare feet padding on the earth, the ritual rhythm of something ancient. As if they were closing something in, or waking something up. He backed away from the window, heart in his throat, the hymn echoing in his head. He grabbed his bag, shoved the tapes and recorder inside, and made for the door. The chair under the knob was gone. Not broken, just gone. He yanked the door open, and the forest greeted him with silence. The children were no longer in the clearing. They were gone. No footsteps, no singing. Only a faint smell in the air, of rot and rust and soil long disturbed. He ran, down the path, past the thorn bushes, through the tree line. His lungs burned. His flashlight flickered in his grip as the sun began to set again. He didn't look back. Didn't need to. Because the singing had started again, behind him. Closer. And closer. He stumbled through a narrow gap between two leaning oaks, and then he saw it. His car. Just sitting there, right where he'd left it at the foot of the trail. The trunk still open from when he'd unloaded his gear days ago. He fumbled for his keys, nearly dropping them in the dirt, and slammed the door shut behind him. He turned the ignition. Nothing. Dead. The singing grew louder. He slammed his fists on the wheel. Then, a voice, from the back seat, whispering, childlike, soft. "It's not the Harmon blood they want." Elijah froze. Slowly, he turned. The back seat was empty. But the recorder sat there. Tape still spinning. No power. No batteries. Playing anyway. It's anyone who listens. Suddenly, the passenger window cracked, a jagged line splitting across the glass. A small pale hand pressed against it from outside. He screamed, unlocked the door, and burst out of the car. He didn't stop running. Not down the road, not through the ditch, not until the trees thinned and he saw the flicker of headlights from a passing truck. He waved his arms frantically, and the driver, a bearded man in his 50s, slammed the brakes. Elijah climbed in without asking. The man looked at him, confused. "You okay, son? You look like you've seen a ghost." Elijah didn't answer. He couldn't. Because from the woods behind them, the singing continued, faint but never ending. When they finally reached the nearest town, Elijah collapsed at the diner, trembling. The waitress offered him coffee. "Rough night up at Hollow Pine?" He looked up sharply. "You know it?" She nodded. "Used to be a camp there, back in the 60s. All the kids disappeared, found their shoes in a circle around the pastor's cabin. No bodies." She paused. "They say it happens every 20 years. Kids go missing. People hear singing. Always the same song." Elijah stared at her. "Did you hear anything?" She smiled sadly. "I listened once." Then she leaned in. "Don't worry, the choir never forgets a voice." And somewhere, just beyond the window, the faintest whisper of children's voices began again, singing. Elijah didn't sleep for days. He checked into a cheap motel 3 towns over, ripped the speakers out of the TV, and unplugged every electronic device in the room. He jammed towels under the door, covered the mirror with the bedsheet, and kept every light on. Still, the singing followed. Faint, just outside his window, on the wind, in the walls, under the floor. Always the same hymn. Always the same voices. He tried playing other music to drown it out. It didn't work. He tried earplugs. Didn't help, because it wasn't just hearing the song. It was remembering it. It was inside him now. Every note etched into the grooves of his brain like a warped vinyl. He thought about burning the tapes, but when he opened his bag, they were gone. Every last one. Only the recorder remained, its tape reels turning slowly, empty, unwinding. He stared at it for hours, until one night he heard something worse than the hymn. Silence. He sat up in bed, heart thumping. The air felt too still. And then, a knock at the door. 3 soft taps. Then again, 3 more. He reached for the baseball bat he'd bought at a gas station and tiptoed to the door. Another knock. He pressed his eye to the peephole. No one. But as he turned to walk away, a small voice on the other side. "Can you help us sing?" Elijah screamed and backed away, tripping over the bed. Another voice joined in. Then another. Then dozens, all different pitches. Some too high, some raspy and old, some clearly not human at all asking the same thing. "Can you help us sing? Can you help us sing?" He grabbed the recorder and hurled it at the wall. It shattered, but the tape reels kept spinning. The room plunged into darkness. The overhead light had died, and from every direction, under the bed, behind the TV, inside the mirror, the voices spilled into the room. He ran, barefoot, shirtless, out into the night. He didn't stop until he reached the diner again. It was closed, dark, but someone was sitting in the booth inside, the waitress, smiling, as if she'd been waiting for him. He banged on the glass. "You said they never forget a voice. How do I make them stop?" She tilted her head. "You don't." He stared, trembling. "I didn't ask for this." Her smile widened. "No one asks to be part of the choir. You just listen." The glass began to frost beneath his hands, from the inside, as if the cold was pouring out of the diner, not in. The lights flickered on, but the diner wasn't empty anymore. The booths were full, with pale children, blank eyes, open mouths, all staring at him, all singing. He turned and ran again. That was a week ago. Now, Elijah wanders from town to town, sleeping in the woods, avoiding every church bell and songbird and music note, because if he hears the melody again, just once more, he might start singing back. And if he does, he'll never stop.